The first indication that the USS Abraham Lincoln was under attack came not from radar screens or satellite warnings, but from a sudden electromagnetic surge that rippled across every sensor array in the carrier strike group. At precisely 0347 hours, the night sky erupted with streaks of fire as 140 Iranian fast attack boats surged from hidden coastal positions, their wakes cutting phosphorescent trails across the black waters of the Persian Gulf. Simultaneously, 73 unmanned aerial vehicles rose like a metal swarm, their engines screaming as they accelerated toward the American formation. But these were merely the opening act. 240 kilometers to the north, invisible to American radar, 12 Chinese J-20 stealth fighters were already approaching their launch parameters, their weapons bays armed with some of the most advanced anti-ship missiles ever deployed in combat. The trap was sprung. The most sophisticated coordinated assault on U.S. naval forces in decades had begun, and the Abraham Lincoln had 97 minutes to survive. Intelligence assessments pieced together in the aftermath revealed that planning for this operation began at least 8 weeks prior, when the J-20 fighters departed Hotan Air Base in Xinjiang province under cover of a routine training rotation. Their actual destination was Shahid Noja Air Base in western Iran, a deployment that went completely undetected by Western intelligence agencies. Accompanying the stealth fighters were 2 KJ-500 airborne early warning aircraft and a single KJ-200, providing the Chinese contingent with robust over-the-horizon targeting capabilities. The strategic calculus was brutally simple. Iran would provide the hammer, waves of expendable assets designed to overwhelm American defenses, while China would deliver the precision strike that could cripple a carrier. Tehran gained the opportunity to demonstrate it could genuinely threaten U.S. naval power. Beijing gained real-world combat data on their premier stealth fighter against the world's most advanced air defense systems. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy initiated the assault with mathematical precision. The swarm of fast attack boats and UAVs began their approach from concealed positions along the coast shortly after 3,300 hours, maintaining complete radio silence until the final attack run. These weren't sophisticated weapons. Many of the boats carried nothing more than 107mm rocket pods, and the drones ranged from commercial quadcopters fitted with explosives to larger loitering munitions. But sophistication wasn't the point. Volume was the weapon. The doctrine was to saturate American defensive systems with numerous low-value targets, forcing the expenditure of million-dollar interceptors against $1,000 threats and creating tracking chaos through sheer numbers. The destroyer USS John Finn, positioned on the northern picket line, opened fire first. At 14 kilometers, its 5-inch deck gun began hammering the approaching surface swarm with devastating accuracy, each shell creating towers of white water and twisted metal. Simultaneously, RIM 116 rolling airframe missiles began launching in rapid sequence against the UAV clusters, their infrared seekers locking on to the UAV's heat signatures. The cruiser USS Mobile Bay joined the defense, its SM-2 missiles arcing upward to engage the larger UAVs at extended range. The carrier's own defensive systems activated. RIM 162 evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, streaking from their launchers in groups of 4, each salvo targeted at separate drone formations. In the first 8 minutes, 37 UAVs disintegrated in brilliant fireballs. 4 FA-18F Super Hornets scrambled from the carrier deck, their afterburners painting orange streaks across the pre-dawn darkness as they raced to establish an outer defensive barrier. For 23 minutes, the defensive performance was textbook perfect. The Aegis combat system orchestrated a symphony of destruction, its computers calculating intercept solutions faster than any human crew could process. Fast boats exploded in sequence as missiles found their marks. Drones tumbled from the sky, spinning wildly before splashing into the Gulf. But with each successful intercept, the Lincoln Strike Group's missile magazines grew lighter. The Iranians were trading boats crewed by zealous volunteers and cheap drones for weapon systems that cost more than most nations' annual military budgets. The mathematics of attrition were working exactly as Tehran had calculated.
At 0410 hours, the second wave struck with devastating coordination. 3 batteries of Ghadir anti-ship cruise missiles, concealed in hardened positions along the Kesh Island complex, received their firing authorization. The timing was surgical. The Lincoln Strike Group had just expended approximately 60% of its readily available short-range interceptors. The Ghadir missiles, far more sophisticated than the initial swarm, launched in a staggered sequence designed to arrive from multiple bearing lines simultaneously. They skimmed across the wave tops at less than 5 meters altitude, their radar signatures merging with sea clutter, approach angles constantly shifting to defeat defensive tracking. The mobile bay's Aegis system performed brilliantly, successfully intercepting 6 of the 8 missiles targeting the main formation, but the defensive umbrella was beginning to show gaps. Warning klaxons shrieked across every ship in the formation. Sailors raced to damage control stations. The real battle had just begun. Then the sky itself seemed to tear open. At 0413 hours, the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye detected anomalous radar returns to the north. Faint, intermittent, almost ghostly signatures that appeared and disappeared from the screens like phantoms. The Chinese J-20s had been airborne for 47 minutes, flying a meticulously planned low-altitude route through the Zagros Mountains before turning southeast. The KG-500 aircraft, orbiting deep within Iranian airspace, had been building a real-time picture of the American formation's exact positions and defensive posture, feeding targeting data continuously to the strike package. When the stealth fighters climbed to their launch altitude and opened their weapons bays, the brief spike in their radar cross-section was detected, but precious seconds were lost in classification and threat assessment. By the time the tactical picture crystallized and hostile massed movers were confirmed, the J-20s had already reached launch parameters at 240 kilometers. 12 CM-400 AKG missiles released in near-perfect synchronization, their solid rocket motors igniting with brilliant white flares, visible even at that distance. The weapons accelerated savagely, exceeding Mach 5 as they climbed in ballistic arcs before tipping over into their terminal dive profiles. These were not the subsonic cruise missiles the Aegis system was designed to defeat. These were kinetic kill vehicles, trading explosive payload for pure velocity and the kind of impact energy that could punch through armored steel like paper. The Super Hornets on combat air patrol attempted to intercept the J-20s, but the Chinese fighters had already reversed course, diving back toward Iranian airspace, where their reduced radar signatures and supporting electronic warfare made sustained tracking nearly impossible. The next 11 minutes became a blur of controlled chaos and split-second decisions. Additional Super Hornets launched from the Lincoln's deck, their catapult shots timed between the carrier's defensive missile launches. The entire strike group transformed into a single, unified weapon system, every sensor feeding data to every shooter, engagement priorities shifting microsecond by microsecond as threats multiplied and closed. The SM-6 missiles, representing the outermost defensive layer, engaged the incoming CM-400 AKGs at extreme range, 8 launches against 8 targets. 5 hypersonic missiles exploded in brilliant fireballs at altitudes above 60,000 feet.
The remaining 7 continued inbound, now intermixed with the final wave of Ghadir cruise missiles and dozens of surviving Iranian drones in a three-dimensional threat environment of nightmarish complexity. The USS John Finn became the focal point for 3 of the Chinese missiles. The destroyer had already expended most of its vertical launch cells against the initial swarm, leaving only its close-in weapon systems for last-ditch defense. The phalanx guns rotated with mechanical precision, their targeting radars locked, barrels beginning to spin. At a combined rate of 8,000 rounds per minute, the 2 CIWS mounts created an actual wall of tungsten in the air, a moving curtain of metal through which nothing organic could survive. 2 CM-400 AKGs disintegrated in the final 3 seconds of flight, their fragments creating a deadly hail of shrapnel that peppered the Finn's superstructure. The third missile, however, came through the defensive fire at an angle the phalanx couldn't quite track. It struck the destroyer just above the waterline amidships, traveling at Mach 4.7. The impact was catastrophic. The missile's penetrating warhead punched through the hull like it wasn't there, detonating deep within the engineering spaces. The explosion ripped through bulkheads, severed power cables, shattered piping systems carrying everything from seawater to fuel. Secondary fires erupted immediately as ruptured fuel lines ignited. The destroyer's entire electrical grid went dark in less than 2 seconds. In the engine room, the temperature spiked to over 500 degrees as steam from ruptured lines filled the compartment. Damage control parties raced through smoke-filled passageways, their thermal imaging cameras barely penetrating the choking black fog. Within 4 minutes, the Finn was dead in the water, listing 7 degrees to starboard, her propulsion system destroyed, progressive flooding threatening to overwhelm her watertight compartments. The Abraham Lincoln faced an even more concentrated assault. 4 CM-400 AKG missiles and 6 Ghadir cruise missiles converged on the carrier in what amounted to a precisely timed hammer blow designed to arrive within a 15-second window. The carrier's defensive systems unleashed everything simultaneously. Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles launching in ripple-fire mode, rolling airframe missiles engaging from multiple launchers, and 3 phalanx CIWS mounts creating intersecting fields of fire. The electromagnetic environment became so saturated with radar energy that birds flying within 5 kilometers of the ship began falling from the sky, their nervous systems overwhelmed. The noise was indescribable. Missile launches, gun systems, warning alarms, shouted commands over communication circuits, all blending into a sustained roar that would leave crew members temporarily deaf. 8 of the 10 missiles died in the defensive fire, but the cost was visible. 3 interceptor kills occurred so close to the carrier that their explosions sent shrapnel sleeting across the island's superstructure. AN Spy-1 radar arrays shattered. Communications antennas were severed. Personnel caught on exposed walkways were cut down by metal fragments traveling at supersonic velocities. 1 damaged Ghadir missile, its guidance system destroyed but its motor still functioning, wheel-carted wildly before slamming into the carrier's port-side quarter below the flight deck. The warhead detonated on impact, blowing a 15-meter breach in the hull, the explosion propagating inward through 2 compartments and igniting fires that would take damage control parties 3 hours to fully suppress.
Then the final CM-400 AKG arrived. It had somehow threaded through the entire defensive envelope, past the SM-6s, past the evolved Sea Sparrows, past even the rolling airframe missiles. Only the phalanx remained, and the missile's terminal velocity was simply too high. The CIWS engaged, tracers arcing toward the diving threat, some rounds even striking the missile's body, but not enough to trigger the warhead or deflect its trajectory. It hit the flight deck at an 80-degree angle, traveling at Mach 5.2.
the kinetic energy alone equivalent to several tons of high explosive. The missile punched completely through the flight deck, through the hangar deck below, and detonated in the carrier's third deck. The explosion created a crater 8 meters in diameter, the blast propagating upward and outward, buckling steel plates, severing hydraulic lines, and destroying 2 FA-18s that were being positioned for launch. Jet fuel from ruptured aircraft tanks ignited, adding to the conflagration. Nearly a quarter of the flight deck was rendered immediately unusable. Even as the carrier battle raged, American strike aircraft were already inbound toward the Iranian coast. The Super Hornets came in low and fast, their weapons bays loaded with AGM-88 ARM anti-radiation missiles that homed on the Iranian radar emissions like bloodhounds. The Ghadir missile batteries, having revealed their positions through their launches, became marked men. The arms arrived first, their warheads designed specifically to destroy radar installations. Then came the AGM-154 joint standoff weapons, glide bombs with sufficient range to keep the launching aircraft outside the engagement envelope of Iranian air defenses. Overhead, EA-18G Growlers pumped out megawatts of electronic warfare energy, creating corridors of radar blindness through which the strike aircraft maneuvered with impunity. The destruction of the Iranian positions was methodical and absolute. The first Ghadir missile battery on Keshm Island disappeared in a series of explosions that registered on seismographs in neighboring countries. The second battery, attempting to relocate after firing, was caught in the open with cluster munitions that shredded vehicles and personnel with equal efficiency. The third battery's command post took a direct hit from a 2,000-pound penetrator that burrowed 6 meters underground before detonating, the explosion collapsing the entire hardened structure. Secondary explosions rippled across the coastal positions as ammunition storage areas cooked off, fires spreading through the installations, thick black smoke rising thousands of feet into the dawn sky. The Iranian fast boat swarm and UAV formations were being systematically annihilated. Without the distraction of the more sophisticated missile threats, American defensive fires found their targets with brutal efficiency. Fast boats exploded in rapid succession, their crews never having the chance to fire their weapons. Drones were swapped from the sky, from everything from missiles to sustained bursts of 20-millimeter cannon fire. The Persian Gulf became a graveyard, its waters choked with debris, burning fuel, shattered fiberglass hulls, and bodies. Of the 140 boats that began the attack, only 23 would limp back to Iranian ports, many so damaged they would never sail again. The UAV losses approached 90%. Only 8 drones survived to be recovered. The Chinese J-20s were racing for Iranian airspace, their mission complete, but their escape far from guaranteed. 2 FA-18F Super Hornets had extended their combat air patrol to intercept, and as the stealth fighters climbed out of the terrain masking and activated afterburners for maximum speed, their radar signatures bloomed on American sensors. The FA-18s achieved radar locks simultaneously, their pilots weapons hot, fingers on triggers. 4 AM-120D AMRAAMs launched in rapid sequence, the weapons accelerating to Mach 4 as they tracked their targets. The J-20s attempted evasive maneuvers, dumping chaff and activating their electronic countermeasures, but 2 of the Chinese aircraft were simply too slow in their reactions. The first J-20 exploded in a fireball visible for 50 kilometers. The second took a missile strike to its port engine, the aircraft maintaining controlled flight for 90 seconds before the pilot ejected over Iranian territory, his parachute deploying as the stricken fighter spiraled into the mountains below. The remaining 10 J-20s crossed into Iranian airspace, where activated air defense systems created a protective umbrella that forced the pursuing Super Hornets to break off engagement. As dawn broke fully over the Persian Gulf, the scope of the engagement became devastatingly clear. The USS John Finn, mortally wounded, was under tow by the fleet ocean tug USNS Catawba, emergency pumps fighting to keep the flooding contained, while helicopters ferried additional damage control equipment. The Abraham Lincoln, though still afloat and capable of limited operations, had suffered damage that would require months of repair in a major shipyard. 47 American sailors were dead, with 123 wounded. Iranian casualties exceeded 400, their coastal defenses in ruins, their asymmetric naval capability decimated. 2 Chinese pilots were missing, though Iranian media would later claim both recovered alive. The geopolitical implications rippled outward with seismic force. The engagement shattered fundamental assumptions about carrier strike group invulnerability and demonstrated that coordinated attacks combining quantity and quality could penetrate even the most sophisticated defenses. Regional allies from Saudi Arabia to Israel were forced to recalculate the reliability of American military protection. China's willingness to directly engage U.S. forces outside traditional dispute zones represented a threshold crossing that fundamentally altered strategic calculations across both the Middle East and Indo-Pacific theaters. The era of unchallenged American naval dominance in contested waters had ended in the pre-dawn darkness of the Persian Gulf.